let me clarify why I really care to speak out about Julian Assange, about the WikiLeaks journalists, because after Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks journal will be the next. I refer to Christine, I refer to Joseph Farrell, I refer to Sarah Harrison. So if Julian Assange gets extradited to the US, it's very likely that they will be the next and all the other WikiLeaks journalists will be the next. So why I feel the duty to speak out. I feel the duty to speak out because I have spent the last 11 years working on the secret documents of WikiLeaks, publishing the very same documents they have published for my newspaper, initially the leading Italian news magazine, L'Espresso, then the leading Italian daily La Repubblica, and today I'm contributing to Il Fatto. And I published the very same documentation, never had any trouble. No one ever questioned me, no one arrested me, no one put me in prison, no one put me into the condition of seeking protection in an embassy and remaining there confined for 7 years without even an hour outdoors. So, I mean, I really cannot accept this double standard where I was able to publish the very same documents they did without any trouble. And basically, they made Julian Assange's life horrible. I mean, he's taking the heat for all this publication. And we journalists who published the very same documents didn't have any problem, you know? So I cannot accept this, you know, as a journalist. I have a professional conscience and I have an ethical conscience. This is why I feel the duty to speak out. And I wonder how many dozens of journalists who work on these documents have got huge scoops, thanks to Julian, thanks to WikiLeaks, are silent. I really cannot accept this. I really feel a sense of decency of speaking out, because I cannot accept this double standard. I cannot accept that one of the most important journalist sources of all times, Chelsea Manning, has spent 8 years in prison. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. You know, one of the most important journalistic sources of all time. How can you accept this? How can you be silent, you know? And so I have seen Julian Assange suffering a lot, both inside the embassy, when I was trying to alert people about how his health was collapsing. And imagine what it means to remain confined in a tiny building. So when I mentioned he was confined in an embassy, people think about embassies like magnificent buildings, very with prominent gardens, like maybe the US Embassy in London or the US Embassy in Rome. But the Ecuadorian Embassy was a very small building. And so I witnessed this huge suffering. And we never try to alert people, when we never try to alert colleagues. They were dismissing this, and they were saying he's spending he's basically want to remain inside the embassy because he could step out anytime he wants. And I was saying, no, he can't. That's why the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention established that he was arbitrarily detained since 2010. And when in 2015, I realized basically I was trying to get deep understanding of the case. And I was asking colleagues, do you know what is going on in Sweden? And I realized that no one had a clear idea about this case. No one had ever tried to get the documents, which for me was unacceptable. How can you work as a journalist without trying to get proper access to the documents? You cannot. Because as journalists, we are required to get the facts. So it was at that point in 2015 that basically I realized that it was important to try to get the documents using the Freedom of Information Act in Sweden, because Sweden is an open jurisdiction when it comes to freedom of information. And I played some tactics. So my strategy was, if I can get anything from Sweden, because Sweden is rather open jurisdiction, then I can use whatever I get from Sweden to get documents from the UK, because UK is not as open when it comes to Freedom of Information Act, is not as open as Sweden. And it worked. It worked because initially the Swedish authorities were collaborative. Initially, they provided 226 pages, few pages actually, but really important, because those pages contain some of the most important information we have on the case. Some of them, for example, how the UK authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service were calling the shot in the Swedish case, which for me it was really surprising, why the UK authorities were calling the shot in the Swedish investigation, why they were basically telling the Swedish prosecutor, don't come to London to question him. Question Julian Assange only after his extradition. And don't drop the investigation. When in 2013, the Swedish authorities were considering to drop the investigation, the UK Crown Prosecution Service was telling them, don't you dare get cold feet. So again, what kind of special interest they had in this case? If this was just a sex case, if it was just a Swedish investigation on sexual allegation, what was the special interest from the UK authorities on this case? So initially, the Swedish authorities were fully collaborative initially. Maybe they underestimate my request. Maybe they were thinking, well, she's an Italian journalist, who cares about what she publishes in a foreign language, and very few can understand. Maybe it was this way. Maybe someone inside the Swedish prosecution authority disagree with the approach of the Swedish prosecutor Marianne Nee. That's why maybe I got the document. I don't know why I got those crucial documents, but as a matter of fact, I got those documents, 226 pages, and after that, the Swedish prosecution authority stopped any collaboration. Because why? Because at that point, the UK authorities were telling them, well, you should consider whether you have to release these documents, because we are part of this process. So maybe you should have consulted us before releasing this document to her. And at the same time, the UK authorities were denying me the documents, and I brought them to the tribunal and I started suing them. That's why the UK authorities were telling the Swedish prosecution authority, maybe you should consult us before releasing this document. So since then, I never stopped this litigation. I'm still fighting. I'm still in the London tribunal trying to get these documents. You have to realize that I was even unable to get the exact number of pages of these documents. I asked both the prosecution authority and the UK authorities, could you please provide the exact number of pages of the Assange file? So the Swedish said, we can't, because these documents are available only in electronic format. And I asked the UK, and they said, we can't, because these documents are available only on hard copy, and which is really weird, because they are corresponding. So if one side corresponds in electronic form, the other side should have the electronic form. I mean, so anyway, they denied to provide the exact number of pages, but the UK authorities provided an estimate, and they said, between 2010 and 2015, we exchanged something like 7,200 and 5,600 pages with the Swedish prosecution authority. Well, you have to realize that after 5 years fighting this litigation with my lawyers, I have 7 lawyers in 4 jurisdictions: Sweden, 1 in Sweden, 2 in the UK, 2 in the US, 3 in the UK, 1 in Australia, 2 in the US. You have to realize that after 5 years fighting this Freedom of Information Act litigation, I only got 779 pages. So just the tip of the iceberg. I'm still fighting for getting all the documents, after 5 years. You have to realize that in the US, our colleagues at the Washington Post were able to get documents about the Afghan war in just 3 years. 3 years. After 5 years, I just got 779 pages, and they have thousands, tens of thousands and thousands of documents about this case, which they don't want to reveal. Why? You wonder why. In some of these documents, crucial documents, have been destroyed by the UK Crown Prosecution Service. Again, why? Why did they destroy the documents? Which is basically, these are documents about an ongoing investigation, very controversial, very high profile. Why did they destroy? They didn't want to provide exact information on the destruction of email. And the Swedish prosecutors, who still keep these documents, because the UK has destroyed these documents, but the Swedish still have these documents, they refuse to provide me a copy of the documents. So what do they want to hide about this case?
Stefania, there's a question as to, could you please publish all the documents that you have so far? And also, could you publish the kinds of comments you have made today? That's the question.
The documents, the most relevant documents, I have published already, and in my investigation, which are available in English and in Italian as well. And as for publishing everything, the full set of documents, I'm still litigating. So I'm waiting until I'm able to litigate this Freedom of Information Act. And the good thing is that next week, I will start litigating with the US State Department because they are completely refusing the document. So as for publishing everything, the full documentation, I still want to litigate the case. I can publish what we discussed today, of course. I have published most of my speeches whenever I was invited. As for the Freedom of Information Act, I'm litigating on 4 jurisdictions. So it takes a lot of time, energies, and money. And, I'm doing this in my personal capacity because none of the newspaper I work, and I'm still working, support this kind of work. So I'm doing it myself. And initially I paid myself in my personal capacity. And now I was able to get a grant just for paying the lawyers. Most of them, or if not, almost of them work for very little. Some of them work for nothing. So just because they want to find the truth, they want to unearth facts. And I have huge respect for the huge work they have done.
Stefania, could you give us a little bit of information about the CPS destruction of documents, please, and your evidence on that?
Yes, of course. So how we learned that they destroyed the documents. In 2015, the Crown Prosecution Service refused to provide any documents. At that point, me and my lawyers wrote to the Crown Prosecution Service and were asking why you're refusing, because what kind of interest you have in refusing these documents, considering that Sweden has provided me some documents, some crucial documents. They kept refusing the documents. We filed a Freedom of Information Act appeal at the London First Tier Tribunal. At that point, they started releasing a few bit of documents, few hundreds documents. And I read these documents and I realized there were huge gaps in the documents. Because, for example, there were no communications about the week Julian had took refuge in the embassy, or there were no communications about the week Julian got asylum from Ecuador. And that was not possible. It was impossible that basically Sweden and the UK Crown Prosecution Service had not communicated in those weeks. So we went back to the Crown Prosecution Service and we said, we want the full set of documents, because we asked for the full set of documents. And they said, we provided the full set of documents. And we said, you didn't. It's not true, because there are huge gaps about crucial times. And so at that point, the Crown Prosecution Service wrote to me and my lawyers and said, we destroyed the documents. And we said, why did you destroy the documents? What kind of documents you destroyed? They said, we don't know what kind of documents we destroyed exactly. And since then, since 2017, basically, we are trying to discover what kind of documents they destroyed, when exactly, who did destroy it, when. And last month, we filed a new appeal asking for precise information about the destruction of documents. I also asked the Swedish prosecution authorities, could you please provide the documents that the UK claim to have destroyed? And they have refused these documents. So it's really, really weird, highly suspicious that they destroyed the documents about a criminal case, which was still ongoing and very controversial. We are still fighting at the tribunal, before the tribunal, to get information about these documents destroyed by the UK. And we are still fighting Sweden to get a copy of the documents.